Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report. Wherever you get your podcast, you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Always much appreciated when you tune in. Today, folks, it's just you and I going to wrap up day 3 of the NFL draft, the final 4 rounds. The Commanders picked 4 players: tackle/guard Braden Daniels from Utah, defensive end KJ Henry from Clemson, running back Chris Rodriguez Jr. from Kentucky, and then defensive end Andre Jones Jr. from Louisiana. And Henry and Jones are more, they're pass rushers. That's what they are. They're not huge defensive ends, but they are pass rushers. I'm going to get to all these guys, these last 4 picks in a minute, because I want to give you a little bit of a rundown on what they add, kind of how I see them after hearing what the coach, what Ron Rivera and Martin Mayhew and even Eric Stokes, senior VP of player personnel, had to say about these guys and about this class. And we've talked a lot about the first 3 picks in the draft. I talked, obviously on Friday, and then on Thursday we talked with Bram Weinstein, the voice of Commanders, about corner Emmanuel Forbes. Go back and listen to those guys if you want to get another wrap or more insight onto some of these draft picks. I'm going to kind of wrap up and look ahead for the next podcast. So that'll be out Monday, and just a short one, just to kind of look ahead of like what's left that they have to do after coming off after the draft. And they're in the process right now of signing undrafted free agents. One guy I know that they are going to sign is offensive lineman Mason Brooks, a guard from Ole Miss. He's a guy that I had heard early in the process that they liked and that they would consider drafting him as a guard. I think they did like him, of course, or they signed him right away, and they didn't draft him, but they did sign him. So he's a guy, someone to keep your eye on as we go through this process, but we'll have all that when those moves are official. Again, before I get to the 4 players from today, one thing I did want to talk about is first of all, you look at this draft, they drafted, 2 defensive backs, 2 offensive linemen, 2 defensive end/pass rushers, and then a running back. And the DB, O-line, and edge rushers are all things that they needed. And I'll get into, I guess start with, obviously with the defensive backs, we know why they went there. And we've talked a lot about that over the last couple of days. So if you want to go back and listen to my podcast on Thursday about Emmanuel Forbes, and then Friday about the day 2 and the round 2 and 3 picks, you can go do that. But they needed to bolster that defensive backfield, and Jartavius Martin will serve as a Buffalo nickel safety, can play slot corner, so he can do a little bit of everything for them. That's why they took him, and I think it was something they absolutely wanted, and it adds to what they can do in their Buffalo nickel package. Takes some of the burden off of Cam Curl. There has been a fear of him wearing down, playing too many snaps at that Buffalo nickel. So the ability to kind of to add some versatility to it really helps them, and it helps him. And again, I told you before, one of the things I talked about on the podcast the other day was the ability to disguise coverages. And you watch Martin do that in college, did it very well. And I think that's something they can do here. Smart, I think, seems to be a smart player. Anyway, 2 O-linemen, needed to get O-linemen. I don't think that this problem is solved. I'm going to talk more about that on the next podcast, but I want to go over some of these guys with Daniels today. Certainly, there's still some questions on that front. The edge rushers, they needed it. You have to keep in mind, it's not just Montez Sweat and Chase Young whose contracts are up after this year. So too are James Smith-Williams and Casey Duhill. So they need to get guys get some guys here to groom for the future. Of course, some of those guys are going to stick around, but you still want to have some guys under contract. And I think you want to get some young guys here that if a Smith-Williams or Smith, if you can't keep all those guys, now you have some guys behind them to try and develop. So that, all the draft is really funny because sometimes what doesn't make sense now might make sense later. And what may, I've always said the easiest way, if you want to win the draft, if you want your team to have a good score, if I'm a GM, it's really easy. Just take a look at what every national analyst says that you guys need, and then pick the big names and whatever around that come your way that fits that position. Then they're going to give you an A, and all the fans are going to rejoice because, hey, I knew this guy, and hey, it matches so-and-so's board. That's great, but that's not how you build for success, because not everybody sets up their board the same way. From team to team, from analyst to analyst, even within teams, you're going to have differences of opinion as about certain guys. Some guys might give this guy a 3rd round grade. This guy might give him a 2nd. This guy might give him a late 1. And then you kind of add them all up and then you come up with your grade. So, you have to keep all that in mind. But to me, it's always been easy to win the draft. You just pick the guys that, oh, you say we need this. Okay, I'll take this here. You say we need this. I'll take this here. That's not how you build a good roster. So I would say, I say that to say, take a deep breath when it comes to all this stuff. Building is a step-by-step process. And I know why. I know you guys, and I know some of you don't have a lot of confidence in a lot of things. Understandable. It's been a long time, folks. I get why some of you may not just buy right away that, oh, these were the best moves, because we don't know. We're not going to know until they get on the field and we start to see them. There's some guys I really like, some guys I'm intrigued by, and some guys I say, oh, not sure about this one. So, but they like him. So what difference does it make if I'm not sure, because they watched him a lot and I haven't. So anyway, take a deep breath and we'll see where this goes. And I know there's a long way to go. And I know some of you guys are going to freak out because that's what fans do. That's what everybody does. But I would just say it's as I'm taping this, it's April 29th. Let's see where it goes. But I also understand why, because we know what this franchise has been and hasn't done in a long time. So I did want to say one before I get to these 4, Emmanuel Forbes. One of the things I found interesting that Eric Stokes talked about with us after the draft was his weight came up, because he is very thin. And when you're with him, you see that he's very thin, and he's going to have to put on a few pounds. Doesn't have to put on 25 pounds or anything like that. He can put on 10 to 15. It's funny because we saw Fred Smoot at Forbes's press conference the other day, and Smoot said that when he came into play, he was like 172, I think it was. That was his weight. By the end, he was over 190. Now, part of that was when he came back, like he had to gain some weight because it was different style that you're being asked to play in terms of run support and all that. So he had to get a little bit bigger, but it also helped him to prevent from wearing down. I don't know that you don't need Forbes. He certainly, if he ever gets up to 190, it's going to take years to get there. And I don't know that he needs to, but I think they would like him to. But one thing that Stokes said that he did, because there were some questions about that. I mean, it's hard not to have a question about it. He went back even further in his review. Usually goes back 2 years for tape to see. He went back 3 years with Forbes just to see what did it look like over these 3 years. Was it an issue? And what he clearly saw was no, it was not. The guy didn't miss games. He was durable. That's the number one key. He was on the field all the time. That's what you need to see. And I think I told you the other day, when I watch him, he seems to use, you get worried about pulling guards or this thing or that thing, guys coming around the edge and in the run game. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how he handles it. But one of the things you see on film with him is he's got very, very quick reactions and he reads plays well. And I saw him beating guards, pulling on screens because he was smart or faster to the ball. And so they couldn't get there. He beat him to the spot, and he helps make a play because of it. And if all he does is just maintain his ground and turn a guy in, then I think the coaches will be okay as long as he's getting some pick sixes. But anyways, I found it interesting that Stokes said he kind of went above and beyond, kind of going back into Forbes's play history to see, was this an issue? And again, what he saw was no, it was not. And what he also saw is what he liked is how Forbes progressed throughout his time at Mississippi State, and just how he went from, a talented player to a highly productive player by the end. One of the things that Ron Rivera talked about with Forbes as well was how he liked how there was a play where there was an issue with him and he knew how to correct it. And so I think those kind of things are things that you always like to hear. So anyway.
The adventure park is ziplining through the trees. It's climbing from platform to platform. It's even an axe throwing competition with your friends. But what the adventure park really is opportunity. Reconnecting with friends and family, accomplishing a challenge, and making lasting memories. So book your visit today and choose your own adventure.
Anyway, that's it on Forbes. And let's get on to the four picks from today. I'm going to go over real briefly with some of these guys, so just bear with me. Braden Daniels, tackle / guard from Utah. when we talked to Rivera afterwards, it did sound like they would like to start with him as a tackle. He played tackle and guard, a lot of left tackle at Utah. I'll be honest, folks. I think this is going to be a work in progress. I think he's very athletic. I think he is athletic. But when you watch the games, there's a lot of inconsistencies. I can see some of the flashes in his game, which is going to attract a coaching staff to say, can you get this out of him consistently with some coaching? And, what's your confidence level in the coaching to coax that, to get that out of him? Because you see it. You could see the stuff on film, or in watching the games, you can see some of the flashes there. But I still would say when you watch him, he seems to be very, very raw. There's a lot to work on, but he's a 4th-round pick. He's a talented 4th-round pick, and a 4th-round pick typically you're not going to find a starting tackle in the 4th round, not as a rookie, or very rarely would you find that. So they took a guy that they feel has some upside. So we'll see if they're right. If it doesn't work at tackle, you can always shift him inside to guard and put him in that competition mix eventually. I don't know how soon that would be, or when they would determine when he might, because if you view this as a guy that needs some coaching, needs some work, you may stick with him a little bit longer, testing him at tackle just to see if that's a spot that they can work with him there, and we'll see. But again, when you watch him, there were definitely some issues there. His footwork is sloppy. It's not consistent, and it leads to issues. And sometimes you see the bend when he's bending at the waist, and sometimes it's a little bit hunched, or it's a little bit more bent over, not like so straight, but a little bit more hunched, where you don't have the balance with your feet. And then there are some times where the reaction is he's reaching with, I would coach basketball, and you tell your kids, and when you played, you reach with your feet, not your hands. And there were times where I see him reach with his hands, not with his feet. So those are things that you have to coach up and get him out of that stuff to see, can he become that guy? How much work will it take to get him there? Again, you see flashes. You see it. You could see him sometimes firing out in the run game and playing pretty well there. And then sometimes with his pass sets, even at left tackle, you see it like, oh, that looks really good. And then other times, because the footwork, maybe you're opening up your hips a little bit too much, and then the guy's got the corner. Because if you do that in the NFL, they're going to own you big time. But again, he's not coming here to start right away. He's coming here to be developed into something really good, they hope, down the road. I almost look at it like they kind of got Chris Paul like that late in the draft last year. And I think this is maybe somewhat of an equivalent, maybe a more talented person, a player than that, but somebody who's still going to okay, you've got some stuff to work with. Now, what can you do with it? Again, fire out in the run game. But man, I just think that's going to take a little bit of time. I'll be curious to see where it goes, because I think you can make him something definitely into as a guard, because I think in a short area space, I think he could be pretty good. And I think that's where I think that firing out and then not having to set so wide sometimes and trying to play that edge, that's where I think it's going to be interesting to watch how he develops. But he'll get some good reps in practice, and we'll see. But again, they view him more as a tackle, but somebody who does have that flexibility. And it's funny because positional flexibility has become such a buzzword around here, and they clearly want that. They always want that. I will say though too, I mean, they have some guys where their positional flexibility, it's a center. And like Nick Gates, he's a center. He played guard at the Giants, but when I asked Ron Rivera Friday night if he could play that position, if he could play guard, if they wanted to put Ricky Stromberg, 3rd-round pick at center, and he just kind of said, not a guard. So they view him as a center. So in other words, the flexibility is center. So if you have a guy that you like, I think you're going to say, okay, we can maybe give up some of that. But if you're not so much if you like, but some guys are good enough where you say, this guy needs to stay here. And I get that. But everybody else is going to have to play multiple spots. And I think that's where I think Daniels would be one of those guys where I think he has the ability to go inside. So if he works at tackle, hey, you have a good tackle that you found in the 4th round. If he doesn't, you can put him inside, bulk him up a little bit. He was like 295. And then I think you could have something pretty solid there too. So you got it. That's why that flexibility is important, because it gives him a chance maybe gives them a chance to maybe find a guy there. And if not, you can move inside. So, but we'll see. Like I said, I think that's going to be a work in progress there, folks. And I'll just say that. In the fifth round, it's KJ Henry, defensive end from Clemson. Heard a lot of good things about him, just in terms of his character. And it's funny because if you talk about that with a football player, you get people shouting, "I don't want choir boys." If he's a choir boy, he just has high character. I don't know that there's anything wrong with that. I know a lot of guys who play in the NFL who have high character, who were really good. You don't have to be a badass or not a badass, but maybe, just a caveman or whatever to be a good player. You can be a really good high character person and be a good player. I think you want those guys, because what it leads to is a more mature team, and it leads to guys showing up on time, being, taking this approach seriously and all that. But in the end, what you want are guys who can really play. And if you can put up with some of the talented guys who aren't of that same ilk or cut from the same cloth, if you have enough guys like that in the room with them. If you have too many guys who are one way, you're going to have trouble. That's all there is to it. But if you can get a lot of good guys in there, you can go there. But you're not just drafting for that. Listen, let's be real. They're taking him because they like him as a player. And the other stuff is like, you like him as a player and he has high character. He was a team leader and captain at Clemson. And like I said, I mean, Dabo Swinney raves about him. You can dislike Dabo Swinney all you want, but he does rave about this guy. And I know people who work at Clemson who rave about that kid. And they did to me a couple weeks ago, because I was asking them about Myles Murphy. And this was a name that came back. And it's funny because one thing Ron Rivera said is that they felt like Henry maybe was a little bit undervalued or overlooked, I should say, because everybody was looking at Myles Murphy on the other side, and they saw what Henry could do. And I think there's definitely something there. And I think he's going to be I kind of like this pick, because first of all, you need another guy at that spot. And I think he's got some length, good arm length, and he did show some moves. He showed some skills that you say, okay, you got this. You can develop this. Now you have something really nice. So he does a really nice job. Got a good quick step to the inside. When I saw him win on rushes, it more often than not was to the inside. And he got he's quick feet, gets good hands in there. And I think that's something that's good for him. Going to have to work on some of the outside stuff. And it's just not just, getting, you saw him sometimes start to win around the corner, but then really not finish. I didn't see him finish there as much, but I didn't watch enough of him to say that. I just think that he was better rushing inside. And I think that there were some things at the top, maybe the top of his pass drop or the top of his rush with his hands that you could I think they're going to probably work on with him. Again, 5th round pick, you're going to have something you have to work on there. I think that's one of the things, but he does have length. He's a good athlete. And, Rivera felt he was a dynamic edge player. You did see him drop into coverage and some zone coverage. Also saw him get beat on a wheel route in one game. Just comes flat at the back out, boom, up. Actually, it was an out and up. And so it was not pretty, but that happens. But what he does have, again, good length. So I think it's guys like this are really good to take a shot on, because he is a high character guy with talent, and those guys tend to work. And I think they can be productive players. I think James Smith-Williams is a productive player for them, and he's certainly a high character guy as well. But this guy has some length, and I think that's good. When I'd watch him, he was often double teamed, so that's going to certainly keep your numbers down a little bit. And I think you see him rushing from stand up. You see him rushing with his hand in dirt. Again, he's a defensive end. If he was in a 3-4, you could consider him an outside linebacker. Here, it's going to be a defensive end / pass rusher. So, and like I said, good quickness to the inside, and we'll see where they go. But I think he's the kind of guy that you want to develop. And I like the running back from Kentucky, Chris Rodriguez, in the 6th round. Couple of things with him before I get in the scouting report too. I think one of the things that was emotional for him was his mom had died in January, and so I think it did come up because he posted something about her on Instagram today. And just because this is somebody that, you know, can't be there, and those I'm sure everything was still so raw for him. And the one thing, being very proud of him. So just kind of an emotional day and moment for him. But I think he's an here. Now, sixth round, you always say sixth round for a reason. I do know they value, you can probably say this, but it felt like this year maybe more than some other years. Where that beauty was value. So, and I'm sure some other teams would have had they didn't have, not fell that other teams maybe would have said, oh, I would have taken him here, and other teams took guys here that you said I would have taken him back here. I think it was probably maybe a little bit more like that this year, but he's one of those guys. So the reason why I'm intrigued by him, first of all, he was productive in the SEC, and that's always a big deal. And you're at Kentucky, you're playing, it's different at Kentucky than if you're a running back at Georgia or at Bama, playing behind some of those lines that they get. So I think that's something you have to look at. Average 6.2 yards per carry. Now, he was not considered a third down back at Kentucky, but doesn't mean he can't do it. And Ron Rivera thinks he can, because what he did show at Kentucky is the ability to pass protect. Very big key if you're going to be a third down back. And they also feel that he showed good hands on checkdowns and screens. Screen game's going to be big with Eric Bieniemy, because that's what they did. That's what they did with Kansas City. So I think that would be big. So he can handle that. And then I think also one of the things that they feel they can correct is his route running. That comes down to coaching, and then your willingness to and desire to improve. So that's why they feel like he can be a 3-down back. As a running back, the thing that I liked, he's very decisive one-cut runner. So he gets off that, he's going on the outside zone, boom, he's going to cut, and he is going to, he's going to turn it right up. And he gets extra yards because of that decisiveness. There's no chopping of the feet to cut. It's boom, boom. And that's where I think he's going to help them. Now, one of the things I did notice as runner is, you look at between the tackles, that's going to be a strength. He's a bigger back. And so between the tackles, it's going to be his thing. But he also runs a little bit high for that. So sometimes I didn't think he was getting the yards and the leg drive that he could, because he was a little bit more upright. So I think that's, again, something to watch. And it wasn't like, there were times I see him try to go, he's coming up, he'd kind of go low, but you're starting from a higher point. So going low, it's not going low enough. And so some of the power was lost in those situations. I thought he was really good, though, when it's that one cut and go. And I think that's why I'm intrigued by him. Now, where does he fit in? Well, clearly they have a couple backs ahead of him, Antonio Gibson. And then you have obviously Brian Robinson. You have Jonathan Williams as well. Those would be the first 3 backs in this roster right now. And then you'd have Rodriguez. So how does he fit in? Well, obviously Robinson's going to be the primary back, and then Gibson will be in his role, and it's going to be a multi-dimensional role. And I do see, I know one of the things they were disappointed in last year with the whole situation Robinson was the inability to get those two on the field more together. So, but I think it's with a 17-game season. And if you lose Brian Robinson, I think they wanted somebody clearly a little bit more consistent than maybe Jonathan Williams, whom I've always liked. I know Bram always liked him, but I think that's why you go with a guy like Rodriguez. The other key here is everybody wants to know about Bieniemy's impact. Bieniemy really liked this guy. So I think that's also a reason why I think he's here, because he feels like he fits what they want to do. Again, decisive one-cut runner, that is key. The funny thing is, because we knew they wanted a running back, but based on what I'd heard after the first round, like I knew how much they liked Jahmyr Gibbs. That was a guy they really liked because he is very versatile, and they felt like he fit what they wanted because of that versatility. I think that's a guy they really liked. So then you start looking, well, is that the kind of guy they're going to go after? after this first round because there were a couple guys that fit that description. Well, clearly they wanted to get another good back instead of just getting that guy. I think it was, when you're looking at Gibbs, they really liked him. And then what did they like about him? The versatility. So some other guys might be versatile, but they may not like him as much because maybe they're not as productive. Anyway, what they got is a bigger, powerful back. This is not a change of pace guy. This is a power guy, but again, decisive one-cut runner. So let's look at now the last one would be Andre Jones, defensive end from Louisiana. Again, just like Henry, if they were in a 3-4, he'd be an outside linebacker. So they didn't get another off-the-ball linebacker, and I'll get into that for the next podcast. But, and I know that's something that, listen, man, I know this is 2 years in a row that we've told you, oh, they'll get a linebacker, and they didn't. So what the hell do we know? But, I know they go into a draft. I know guys that they liked, and then the draft unfolds and you don't get everybody you want. And then you hear that again, well, you can't get everybody you want. Well, you got to fill that. You got to fill that. And again, I'll get into that a little bit more, but it is a spot that you still have to fill. A lot of time after this, said the same thing last year, and the position wasn't upgraded enough, and they need to do it. I do think Cody Barton could be better than what people anticipate here. Still need more there. So anyway, that's a little aside. Let's get to Andre Jones. He's an older prospect. He's going to turn 25 in October. I think he's got some things to watch there. It's a little bit hard to gauge him. The level of play is different when you're watching guys like Henry and all that, and you can see him against a higher level of competition, a little bit easier. But one thing you see with Jones, again, really good length, long arms, and that's good. I think there's sometimes he gets a little bit upright when he rushes, but certainly not every time. But you see it. What I like though is there were a couple of times I could tell that on the rush, there's one play, I think it was against Marshall, where he's rushing from the left side, and he rushed up and down, left and right side, in the dirt and all that. But there was one play where the linebacker was blitzing to his side, through the B gap, and he was on the outside, and he could have easily charged upfield to go get the quarterback. But if he had done that, the quarterback, there's a good chance that there's a gap that widens because of where the right tackle is positioned. The quarterback could have gotten outside the tackle on the play, extend the play, and then maybe a big play. But instead, he holds outside. He doesn't go as aggressive upfield as he maybe would have otherwise. And the blitzer kind of stumbled a little bit, but the quarterback still had nowhere to go because he held that pass rush contained, and the quarterback had to throw an incompletion. So I only bring that up because it shows the willingness to kind of work with your guys, work within the structure of that defense, of that play call, and that speaks to his maturity. And so I think that's not a reason necessarily why you draft a guy. I just think it's a benefit of a guy like that. I think you're drafting this guy because he's got some length. He's a good athlete, and you got something to work with. That's why you draft him. But I did like that. So, and there were times like, it's funny because you start to see him, and then even this game, one of the games I watched, like, you kind of want to see more. And then there was a 3rd and 6 situation, or there's like a 3rd and long situation, where it was the first time where I felt like he just rushed. A lot of other times I felt like he was, first of all, he's being double teamed or chipped, and maybe not rushing as aggressively as he would want to. And the one time I saw him do that, he caused either a hit or a pressure. I don't think it was a sack, but it was his best rush, but it was because he just went. And so that's why, like I said, I think there are times where you see him like, okay, 7th round, you can find something to work with here. A little bit older. So is that he's certainly not a young prospect. I mean, shoot, he'll be older than a couple of guys in their defensive line room who have been here for a couple of years, like Chase Young, for example. But I think that's the kind of guy that you want to get there, mature, 25, going to be 25 in October. That's a little bit much, but he does have skills. That length, I would be very intriguing. And again, he is a good athlete. So they had another guy. They need to get those edge rushers. And I think that was, whether it's a good pick or not, we'll find out in a couple of years. But I think it's the right kind of prospect when you look at it. And I haven't gone over the board and say, oh, they could have taken this guy or that guy. I can't do that. Because I don't know all these guys, what they did. I haven't studied them all. But in watching this and talking to them, I think that I understand why they would go in this direction with Andre Jones. So there you go. That's a wrap on the final round of the NFL draft. So those are your last 4 picks. I hope you guys learned something out of over the last couple of days by me doing this and enjoyed it. And I appreciate you tuning in. Like I said, I mean, I'm a little bit bleary-eyed by this point, but I will be back with another one, a quick one on Monday or for Monday, just wrapping up, maybe a few more draft nuggets, looking ahead. Here are a couple of things they still need to go do, and this is what we maybe can anticipate. So there you go. That's it. Appreciate you tuning in. Talk to you next time.